Assalamu alaikum. Starting with the name of Allah, who is the most merciful and the most beneficent. I'm Kuratul Endurani and I will be your host for today's session. If somebody asks you, are you Muslim? The immediate answer would be, Alhamdulillah, yes I am. But what if somebody asks you, why are you Muslim? This will make you start think, for most of us the answer would be, it's because I was born into the Muslim family. But is that the correct answer? What if we weren't born into the Muslim family? Would we still be Muslims? So all these questions lead us to a point that are we Muslims by chance or by choice? In Quran chapter 4 verse 136, it has been said that, O you who believe in Allah and His messengers and in the scriptures He sent down to His messenger. To ask believers to believe might at first seem stranger. The fact, however, is the belief here has two meanings. Firstly, a person who believes because he was born and raised into a Muslim family. Therefore, by default, he joins the camp of the believers. Secondly, the believers indicate true faith, which means a man believing in truth with full sincerity and devoted man's sincerity determination to mold his way of thinking, his likes, dislikes, his conducts and character according to the will of Allah. So technically, in this verse of Quran, the believer in the first sense of term, which are Muslim by chance, are being asked to change themselves into the believers in the second sense, which are the Muslim by choice. In order to attempt to accomplish the journey of chance to choice, we have our guest speaker here with us online. She is the director of Tawassul International Center for Publishing Research and Dialogue, Rome, and is a noted Islamic Muslim author, philosopher, translator, and interfaith expert. Trained in Latin, Greek, and ancient philosophy for over a decade, with her philosophy in ancient Greek philosophy from Sapienza University, Rome. She has translated over 60 works into Italian, and they include some of the Muslim classic novels, poems, and other literary work. She has also written 5 books, including a biography of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and translated various philosophies of Allama Muhammad Iqbal. And most importantly, over 10 years ago, after a long and intense study of Islam, its history, civilization, she embraced Islam. So let's welcome Dr. Sabrina Lei. Assalamu alaikum, ma'am.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
To be honest, it's an honor for me to have you on this session.
Thank you. It's an honor for me to be here with you. So it's also a pleasure to speak about Muhammad Iqbal and the issue related to the Muslim community. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, ma'am. So now you can start your speech by that.
So again, I would like to send you all my salam from Rome, Italy. It's a great honor for me to share my talks of Muhammad Iqbal. This is the Hakeem of Ummah. And today I will try to explain the relevance of his talks on the intellectual reconstruction of the community. Clearly, before moving to the topic, I thank Bahria University and its Iqbal Chair for the kind invitation. I thank you all also for your presence, attention and care. In this lecture, I would like to elaborate and illustrate some of the very deep philosophical conception and intuition formulated by Muhammad Iqbal in his master philosophical piece that is widely known and universally appreciated, and it is the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam. However, at the same time, I will refer briefly also to lesser known speeches and writings of Iqbal in order to back up my points. Muhammad Iqbal is widely known both in the East and the West as a finest aspiring poet. But it is, in my opinion, also and mainly one of the most brilliant philosophers of the modern era. His classic philosophical exposition, the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, attests to this fact. His philosophical thought, expressed in his several lectures, represent a very mature reflection of a thinker who in the course of his intellectual life was actually deeply engaged in the dialogue between the Western intellectual and philosophical experience and the religious and philosophical premises of Islamic thoughts. If we read carefully his lecture, which has been delivered to the intellectual awakened youth and Muslim of his time, we will see and we experience the mind of an original and mature thinker in his attempt to reinterpret, reshape the Islamic philosophical tradition in relation to the issues and challenges posed and raised by the Western thought. Actually, Iqbal, in this lecture, invites the Muslim of his time and their future generation to relate to the Western thought without losing their own cultural and religious heritage. But he, at the same time, interprets this encounter as an occasion to reevaluate and rethink the inner possibility of Islamic culture and philosophy in the light of the modern experience. This lecture, starting from the philosophical premises of Iqbal's social and political thought, are aimed at drawing inspiration for the development of the overall intellectual development of the Muslim community. In other words, Iqbal thought could actually lead us in the process of drawing some proposal for the contemporary Muslim community revival. This not only at the intellectual cultural level, but also at the social and political as well. Actually, Iqbal lead us open for us a new path, and he lead us through the way in which the modern and contemporary Islamic community is called to cross in order to face the future according to the more genuine and founding Islamic values, respecting at the same time the deep spiritual meaning of Quranic revelation. Some of the reflection in the reconstruction revision talks in Islam have been actually elaborated quite deeply by Iqbal, while others could be intended only as a kind of starting point for a further elaboration. Actually, it's so in the Muslim intellectual of the future, the people were entitled to further develop some of his very deep insights. The dichotomy between Islam and the West, or better, between the Western intellectual heritage and the Islamic one, was considered by Iqbal as a kind of historiographical misinterpretation at pure intellectual level. In this regard, in fact, Iqbal underlines that even when at the historical and political level, the relation between Islam and the West has been characterized by conflict, at a deeper intellectual one, we should assume a different perspective. So this perspective is rooted in the fact that the intellectual renaissance of Western world actually happened mainly due to the inspiration which in the late medieval times Christian world got from the intellectual and scientific Islamic heritage. Iqbal clearly argues that the Muslim of his time lost the ability, unfortunately, to relate to Islamic heritage openly, fruitfully, and dynamically, and of course also critically when there is the need. Iqbal also that in his lecture that Muslims focus their attention and intellectual power only and exclusivity of some of the late historical and intellectual manifestation of Islamic civilization, wrongly considering them as an eternal paradigm, reflecting the praxis and theory inspired by the Quranic revelation. And this, according to Iqbal, has been a great mistake without to slow the further development of Islamic thought. In the course of Islamic civilization, historical and intellectual developments, some elements deeply alien to the core of his message and perspective have penetrated, corrupting it and imparting to the Islamic intellectual history a course that fell short of its real nature. Iqbal's intention in this lecture is to clear the path from all the foreign elements which during the course of Islamic history have been sedimented in Islamic thought, and which at the time of decadence were critically assumed by Muslims as original Islamic teachings. This is the reason why Iqbal argues that the awakening of Muslim world is possible only if the elements which are not part of the real Islamic message are found and removed, in helping in this way in achieving a perspective nearer and closer to the Quranic revelation. In other words, the Islamic intellectual and cultural tradition will be clearly revived, and Muslims will progress on Islamic foundation of original Islamic foundation only after a careful process of differentiation between the essential metaphysical, anthropological, and theological perspective endowed in the Quranic revelation, and the influence which during the century corrupted the genuine Islamic message. So actually, Muslim should be able to differentiate between what are the perspective, metaphysical, anthropological, theological, who are really Islamic, and the other one is that are actually cannot be considered as a genuine Islamic message. In this way, and according to Iqbal, in this way, it's possible the reconstruction of Islamic political and social thought in order to adapt it to the needs of modern life. Iqbal reflection are not a simple intellectual exercise, and this is a point that should be underlined quite carefully. And its philosophical and theological reflection are not intended for a small club of specialists, but they are actually for the spiritual reverting on the entire Muslim community. So Iqbal intended this reflection to inspire all the Muslim and not only a special class of specialists in philosophy or intellectual. So his poetry and his philosophical thought was intended for the benefit of all the Muslim community. In this way, Islam will become a vital force not only in the life of the individual, but in that one of the whole society. In the statement on Islam and nationalism, while replying to a statement of Maulana Hussein Ahmad, which will be published in Hessan on March 1938, Iqbal clearly says, and then let me quote a part of his speech. The speeches that I quoted are all taken by the work edited by Latif Ahmad Shervani that we published in Lahore in 2005, entitled Speeches, Writings and Statement of Iqbal. This is a very important work in which it's possible to find all the collection of speeches of Iqbal and writings that maybe are not widely known as the reconstruction. Iqbal says clearly, Islam does not aim at the moral reformation of the individual alone. It also aims at a gradual but fundamental revolution in the social life of mankind. We should altogether change its national and racial viewpoint and create in its place a purely human consciousness. It was Islam, and Islam alone, which for the first time gave the message to mankind that religion is neither national or racial, nor individual and private, but purely human, and that its purpose was to unite and organize mankind despite all its natural distinctions. Actually, at the beginning of his reflection in the reconstruction talk of Islam, Iqbal think about what is the meaning of the human presence in this world. And then he said that this world is for humanity a place of development and struggle at the same time, where every individual is continuously a call to action. So for Iqbal, the notion of action and challenges from the environment, it could be natural at the beginning or can be social and political later, or when in the course of human civilization. This is, however, assume a central point in his reflection. Human beings actually are bound to act, and action needs freedom as its precondition. a kind of freedom which is not anarchy, but a way of improving and shaping someone's or nature according to well-established principles. In other words, you can actually argue that, according to this perspective, every moment of the life of a believer is a progress towards God. This is independently of the place you occupy or the role assumes in this world, or also the spiritual condition when in finding itself. One of the central concepts, actually, of Iqbal's philosophical thought is the notion of a man as the deputy of God on earth, according to the Quranic teaching. So this insightful approach to human nature raises from the humbleness of humanity biological constitution, and it leads towards its complete spiritual development in a continuous ascending movement towards progress and freedom. Now I'm quoting a brief passage from the fourth lecture of the Reconstruction entitled "The Human Ego is Freedom and Immortality." Iqbal says that it is not the origin of a thing that matters, but it is the capacity, the significance, and the final reach of the emergence that matters. So this means it's not the humble constitution, physical constitution of the human being, its fragility, but its capacity, its power, these potentialities, that's also along with the significance of his role in this world. The significance, which is another word for responsibility in this case. According to the Quranic revelation, humanity, actually the beginning of life in this world, has to face a difficult and dangerous environment. In this beginning, human beings were forced to live in a condition of constant insecurity and need. At the same time, it is necessary to remember that they do not occupy the earth to the consequence of divine punishment. This place, this planet Earth, even with all suffering and pain, seems to be the more suitable for the full development of human capacity and skills, as human existence shares with universe its dynamic character and always aims at new tasks to perform. Actually, Islam teaches that humanity, as I said before, is called to interpret it and face hardship. So this means it's called to develop its intellectual power, but also to face it. So its practical capacities as something to be overcome, because hardship is something to be overcome for the material growth and the spiritual development of the individual and the community. Quranic revelation actually does not deny the presence of injustice, pain, and evil. However, it does not interpret them as an essential part of the constitution of the universe, and therefore as a necessary and consequentially impossible to overcome. They are, Quran teaches, accidents which man is called to face and overcome. In a speech, Islam as a moral political ideal, this is a very important speech. So Iqbal clearly says, and then I quoted just a small passage, sin, pain, sorrow, and struggle are essentially real, but Islam teaches that evil is not essential to the universe. The universe could be reformed. The elements of sin and evil can be gradually eliminated. All that is in the universe is God, and simply destructive force of nature becomes source of life if properly controlled by man, who is endowed with the power to understand and to control them. The natural forces, which in a less developed and more primitive stage of his existence constitute for man or represent for him a source of danger and relative misery, through the process of knowledge and the means to dominate the nature, can change their nature and become, in the long run, resources. This is we spoke about now that have the importance to action, to be capable to face the challenges from the environment. But Iqbal also underlined that in this process of continuous improvement, the role of time is fundamental. Thanks to the temporal reality of human life and the future interprets open possibility where man can realize or lose himself, it is possible to build a lasting society where the greatest importance is accorded to the dialectic between tradition and innovation. So the place of the man, the conduct appropriate to his role in the world, actually, are deeply connected with his environment, find that their respective existences are related to each other. So, in other words, according to Iqbal, the environment, so the metaphysical nature of the environment and that one, or the material constitution of human beings, they have something in common. And this feature that there is common to both of them, it actually allowed the process of improvement in time and development. Actually, that Iqbal actually say that since the nature of the universe is dynamic and deeply connected with the Creator, in the same way man, as a deputy of God in this world, is called to interpret the sign of his environment. This is in order to answer promptly to the challenges of his society and to act with strength in the historical becoming. In Islam, actually, history has got a very positive connotation. Science is interpreted as a source of inspiration and knowledge, even though it should not be approached as an aspiring reverence of the past. Iqbal actually gives us also a central role to education, in order to put Muslims in the condition to understand the premises of their religions and culture and to learn from their own history. This is a very important that to learn from your culture, or from your tradition, but you should be capable also to open new way with a new interpretation of your past. This is the only way to true Muslims will be capable of looking at the future with hope and at the past with pride. This is also a two central concept, without losing themselves in the space of what is lost, and with the awareness of the possibility of new intellectual gains and new cultural awakening. According to Iqbal, there is every stage of human life, every stage of human civilization has got always positive connotation. Even when it can be not endowed by success or some other positive features. But what Iqbal seems to consider negative is the lack of will of development. So the fact that remaining trapped into the tradition, then the incapacity of moving forward, or actually the abrupt move that disconnects somebody from his past. These are two extremes that Iqbal sees more or less as the outcome of the same perspective. Actually, Iqbal says, if today you focus on your vision on Islam and seek inspiration from the ever-vitalizing idea embodied in it, you will be only reassembling your scattered forces, regaining your lost integrity, and thereby saving yourself from total distraction. One of the profoundest verses in the Holy Quran teaches us that the birth and rebirth of the world of humanity is like the birth and rebirth of a single individual. So Iqbal believed that there could be a resurrection of the civilization, even when it looked quite lost, when it looked like that it lost actually power. But the most important thing for Iqbal is not losing the spiritual power. This is that it is the rock on everything could be further built. Iqbal actually perfect is completely different from that one of traditionalists, as this is clear. Because they interpret the past, the glorious Muslim history of the first centuries as the peak of Muslim civilization. So this means that according to traditionalists, the peak of Muslim civilization is something which belongs to the past, but not to the future, if not to the present. For Iqbal, instead, the past does not have an exclusive and sacred meaning, and it should be interpreted as something possible to reach in the present or in the future. So, according to Iqbal, the past is something that could be the greatness that is be experienced in the past is something that could be repeated. It's not something which is impossible to reach in the future. The past becomes the object of study and reflection of Iqbal in the life of the Quran and the life example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in order to understand what are his elements of strength and weakness, and what are his mistakes and attitudes that should be modified. So this is the reason why it is important to study the past, to have also a critical approach to the past. History, understood as a continuous and dynamic process, according to Iqbal, one of the most important teachings of the Quranic revelation. Islamic teachings are in fact very peculiar about the relation between these terms: temporality and eternity, appearance and reality, individual and society. All these three terms are related to each other directly, between themselves and collectively. The interpretation of history as a continuous dynamic process, according to Iqbal, is one of the most important teachings of Quranic revelation, which Muslim thinkers do not understand in its deep implication for several reasons. Islamic society must be actually rooted in the eternal principles, stable pillars in a world of continuous changing. But at the same time, it should be able to use them as means in order to read and interpret the sign of history, and not try to deny and ignore them. In fact, actually, if the eternal principle which should guide humanity through the historical development, when they become the source of denial of every becoming, they are actually deprived of their fundamental role, and they become the means employed to deny the reality of history, which the Quran interprets as one of the greatest signs of God. Be and becoming, appearance and reality, eternal and temporal in the Quranic revelation are deeply connected, because they are all aspects of the same creation, which is limited and destined by the Creator. This now we are going to quote from a very important central passage of the reconstruction. The important point to note in this connection, however, is the dynamic outlook of the Quran. Only we should not forget that life is not change pure and simple. It has within its element of conservation also. While enjoying his creative activity and always focusing his energies on the discovery of new vistas of life, man has got a feeling of uneasiness in the presence of his own unfoldment. The spirit of man, in its forward movement, is restrained by forces which seems to be working in the opposite direction. This is only another way of saying that life moves with the weight of his own past on its back, and that in any way of social change, the value and function of the forces of conservatism cannot be lost sight of. It is with this organic insight into the essential teaching of the Quran that modern rationalists ought to approach our existing institutions. No people can afford to reject their past entirely, for it is because in their past that has made their personal identity. Actually, the past is a source and the foundation of identity, both for individual and for civilization. In other words, we can also argue that the community, as well as an individual, without history, is deprived not only of its identity, but also of its freedom. The historical identity of civilization constitutes the starting point of the historical development, which is possible only if rooted in the intellectual freedom and spiritual awakening. The loss of historical development, notwithstanding the reason behind it, leads a community to elaborate a sort of myth of its past. The study and the rise of the fall of civilization teaches us that every civilization could be assumed as mythical, both at its beginning and its end. But while at the beginning the mythical elements could be actually considered as a manifestation of strength, a way of opening new ways and a source of strength as well, at the end it becomes a symptom of lack of strength and incapacity to gain a role in the world history. The relation between the sense of human being and the constitution of the universe, as has been expressed in the Quranic revelation, is founded on dynamism. History is possible only if there is freedom, a freedom which is another name for responsibility, which binds the believer to act, to participate and to take positive steps in fruitful resolution. Actually, Iqbal always identify freedom with responsibility, because he said that only through freedom a human being can be totally responsible. But this is actually where freedom became a synonym of responsibility, in his opinion, only through education and then a spiritual training of the individual. Actually, going back to the notion of history, Iqbal is very critical towards a secret conception of history. It has been formulated both in Greek philosophy and especially its revival in Nietzsche vision, which is defined as a disparate doctrine from the metaphysical point of view. According to Iqbal, he said the spirit of Islam is anti-classical, and Greek thought, even when it has been a source of inspiration for Muslim thinkers for a long time at the beginning of their civilization, it prevents them in the long run from understanding fully the originality of Quranic revelation and its revolutionary message compared to classic metaphysics. A metaphysical doctrine which denies the role of time through the eternal recurrence, so as a cyclical conception, also nullifies the values of history, which becomes meaningless and not a source of new hopes and projects. So eternal repetition doesn't bring nothing new, and then it kills actually the spirit of the individual from and don't inspire them to action, because action is only inspired when it leads to a change, a positive change. Time in such a vision appears as an horizon of necessary events, established since eternity and just waiting in a kind of limbo to happen. In the reconstruction, Iqbal clearly says, the world process or the movement of universe in time is certainly devoid of purpose. If by purpose, so finality in this way, we intend a foreseen and far-off fixed destination to which the world creation moves. To endow the world process with purpose in this sense is to rob it of its originality and its creative character. Its ends are termination of a career. They are end to come and not necessarily premeditated. A time process cannot be conceived as a line already drawn. It is in line with the drawing and actualization of a possibility. It is purposive not only in the sense that it is selective in character, and brings itself to some sort of present fulfillment by actively preserving and supplementing the past. The notion of takdir, as understood and interpreted by Iqbal, represents the link actually between God, man, and universe. In other words, Iqbal equates the notions of time and destiny. And because, according to Iqbal, at the core of the relation between human beings and God, there is the qadar and freedom. Both destiny, understood according to Iqbal's perspective, and freedom stay at the core of the relation between human beings and the Creator. Taking inspiration from Iqbal's deep insight, it seems to be possible to further argue that qadar is another name for history. History, in fact, is made by human beings, but it belongs in the reality to God. This is the meaning of the relation in simple word between qadar and freedom, as far as humanity is concerned. Human beings are born to act. This is their qadar, in a wider sense. They are born to act in history, creating a civilization constantly open towards the future, a civilization which is open, dynamic, and inclusive. At the same time, however, an Islamic civilization is true, a full sense, will never be reached fully, thanks to true Islamic civilization, or a civilization which has the fulfillment of all the duties toward the Creator, will be possible only at the end of history. So how is possible to overcome the conception of a glorious past history that could not be repeated? This is thinking that is due to the limited capacity of human beings and their relation dependency with their Creator, It's not possible to establish a fully Islamic civilization. This means a civilization in which all the possibility of Islamic teachings, as endowed in the Quran and Sunnah of the Prophet, are, peace be upon him, could be fully developed, because Islam is potentially infinite. So this means that the teaching of Islam cannot be exhausted by any civilization in any given historical time. And this is true because the Quran is the revelation of God. It cannot be consumed by history, but it continuously inspires history. So this is the difference between, for example, an ideology and religion and a true revelation. An ideology is rooted in its time and it's consumed by future, as the history clearly showed at different levels. But the God revelation is his infinite potentiality, cannot be exhausted neither by time and neither by any civilizational expression. So Iqbal used to say that Islam is destiny and will not suffer any destiny. So this is the explanation actually of this very deep, insightful words. Actually, and we could say that the true Islamic civilization is a civilization capable to bear its qadr, to bear its destiny, to bear its responsibility, at the same time to act both with freedom and responsibility. In the seventh, the last lecture of the reconstruction, which is entitled "Is Religion Possible?", Iqbal observed that the contemporary man is in need of a spiritual interpretation of the future, of the universe, a spiritual emancipation of the individual and a universal principle, capable to lead the spiritual evolution of humanity of spiritual basis. Iqbal argues that only the Muslim society will be capable to lead the humanity of the future as a spiritual leader among the nations through the rediscovery of its more original and essential feature. Iqbal demonstrates throughout the careful quotation of Quranic verses that the becoming should not be interpreted as a stain or an imperfection of being, but as a classic philosophy and metaphysics, but is a part of his own existence, of which both the natural and historical manifestation are symbols. Actually, in the context of Quranic perspective, the destiny of man could not be interpreted as an oppressive fate controlling his life from outside as an external force, but instead as the inner realization of the internal possibility of his own essence. In fact, only what is can become, and the process of historical development through time interprets an open possibility, realizes his internal positive potentiality. So, actually, I'll quote the last part, the last passage of one of the lecture of the construction. Islam as a policy is only a practical means of making this principle a living factor in intellectual and emotional life of mankind. It demands loyalty to God, not to thrones. And since God is the ultimate spiritual basis of all life, as conceived by Islam, is eternal, it reveals itself in variety and change. A society based on such a conception of reality must reconcile in its life the category of permanence and change. It must possess eternal principle to regulate its quality of life, for the eternal gives us the foothold in the world of perpetual change. But eternal principles, when they are understood as to deny all possibility of change, which according to the Quran is one of the greatest signs of God, tend to immobilize what is essentially mobile in its nature. This is the last quotation, and I once again thank you for this conversation. Thank you for your attention and care. And may Allah bless all of us in this very challenging time. It's been a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for such a descriptive and insightful and enlightening speech. Now we will move to the question-answer session. Okay, so for the very first question, since it's for every single journey, there is a beginning point, and there are a lot of problems that we encounter in a certain journey. So enlighten us about your journey toward Islam and when you first started taking interest into Islamic studies, and also the problems you have faced throughout the way. Just describe about that.
Yeah, so actually that my journey towards Islam has been at the beginning very much intellectual. So because I got my PhD in philosophy, and I started reflecting both about my previous faith, and at the same time the relation between revelation and free thought. So between revelation and philosophical thought. This is one of the greatest issues that believer face in Catholicism mainly. So even there are expression of Catholic thought, philosophy, and is always seen and something which challenges religion. So you could not see, very difficult to see the two, the revelation and the human understanding going together, or try to find an harmony. And at the same time, I was also quite upset by the fact that after so the philosophy of the 20th century actually was in a deep crisis. So in terms of opening new ways of thinking, or opening something which was actually related to a new aspiration for a civilization renewal, even in the West, because also not only the East but also the West faces some setback in terms of its own civilization. And the science philosophy always been for Western civilization a way of taking inspiration to open new ways. I noticed that in the 20th philosophy, it was an issue actually for several reasons, and in fact that say that has been written philosophy after philosophy by Habermas. So and all these things that it created me such a kind of an intellectual uneasiness that got also backlash. There was also a backlash on the spiritual development of the individual. But then I got the possibility to meet Muhammad Iqbal. That was my husband. He's a South Asian. Introduced me to Iqbal, and I never heard about him as a philosopher. Actually, in Italy, he's very, very known also to the work of the late, now he passed away, Professor Salerno, who translates his poems his Urdu poems, and also previously there were several editions of his Persian poems, and I was actually, but not in terms of his philosophical talk, was quite unknown to me. So then when I came to know that Iqbal, so I read it, the first date I was not a Muslim still, I read it, the reconstruction of religious talk in Islam. So I find it easy to understand what is the reference of Western philosophy, because actually it was my background. I was at the beginning, I was not very much ready to understand what was the reference of to the Quran, because for a Christian to read the Quran is extremely difficult because of the two very different structures of the text compared to Gospel, for example, or the Old Testament. But however, what I find extremely amazing in a way, or it really inspired me to open a new channel, my reflection, was related to the way in which actually Iqbal is capable to put three elements in dialogue with each other. So not only the Western philosophy, but also the Eastern tradition, the Eastern philosophical tradition that at the time I didn't know quite, was quite obscure to me, but later I studied all the reference that he gives to the reconstruction or also in his poems, and the Quran. So I saw for the first time that there was something which was quite original in the way in which revelation and free thoughts expressed in philosophy, they were actually going together. They were harmonizing, even if they were coming from different civilizational experience. And so even when I didn't know much about the Quran, this gave me also the possibility to see, to harmonize all this, this different concept, that it was quite amazing for me. So this was for me the starting point. So I understood that there could be, could be possible for a thinker to open a new way of thinking, a new civilization, something, philosophy could be still a source of inspiration, because philosophical language, philosophical reflection is in the West took in a way the role of religion in inspiring people. This is in the large, but at the same time, this could go along with a revelation. So the two things should not exclude each other, and they should not create a dichotomy or a challenge in the believer as a unity. So this also been my. Then also about challenges, so I didn't have much challenging when I decided to, maybe because of the time was not, Islamophobia was not very much developed, so this is several years ago now. It was not quite developed as now, and maybe I find the way a bit easy. I don't know how this is, but spiritually, intellectually speaking, that I could, through Islam, I could clarify a lot of issues that they were anti-me since my youth, if I can say.
I'm glad to know that you haven't encountered any such problem, which occasionally people do. So let's move to the second question, which is, what are the myths about Islam that most of the non-Muslim people have? Or what about you? What kind of myths you had in the beginning about Islam?
Yes, I think that more or less I had the same prejudice as other people. This is very strange, because actually that I think that education is amazing, because very educated people, and also the people who are very common, they share the same prejudice about Islam. Because of I think two reasons. The first one, because it's the way in which Islam is taught in the school or whatever. There's always a reference of a very remote religion. So it's very interesting that with the school that they make you study all the religion of the world, and then sometimes you feel more closer to religion, that they are quite very different from Christianity. But when it comes to Islam, it is always a kind of bias, a kind of prejudice. So Islam is the religion of Arabs. So it's something which is molded on their own, on their own way of living, on their own nature, on their own social structure. So it's not something that could go beyond that cultural space, cultural and historical space. And then in case it went beyond, so it corrupted. So the historical process of other people, civilization who met Islam. So this is the idea that actually they give you. So even all the medieval, not only in the medieval time, they were, of course, everyone knows that the Crusades were shaping the relation between the world of the West and Islam. But there always been an attempt after the time of Reconquista, so after the time which, for example, that there was the attempt of the Christian powers to regain Andalusia, so that part of Europe that it was Muslim for more than 7th century, or also to regain part of South Italy, which is was got Sicily and also southeast of Italy. There were two important small Islamic kingdoms. So during this process, actually, that was a split. It was created a kind of a splitting process. So this means that the church hierarchy, they just took it all the knowledge, technical, scientific, or even literary knowledge of the created by Muslims, and this was as represented by the rich libraries in Andalusia. Or they got inspiration from every feature of Muslim civilization. They appropriate it, they make their own, but at the same time they try to destroy it, to disconnect Islam from both Judaism and Christianity. So they make it like a kind of corruption of their scriptures, a kind of heretic, as we can say, heretic text or heretic religion, in order to. This was actually a long process, which with the different ways still is going on now. Unfortunately, still a lot of prejudice about Islam are still that of medieval time. It is because they are proposed and reproposed where there is a political crisis or there is an issue, or also there are some ways of, how can I say, they want just to cover some things that are going on in the public space or political space in some European countries, that they always repropose the same partner. And what is the difference now? So, but different now is all in the future, so it's in the honor of possibility. So it's in the fact that we in the West, not like in the medieval past, where actually even the Quran was, when it was translated into Latin, it was banned. Actually, that now we live in a full democratic space, and Muslims who live in the West should be capable to use it, these full democratic tools, in order to clear all this prejudice, all this misunderstanding that are going on about Islam. So. This is the reason why that all the books should be published, or more people should be in the public space, and we should give a balance. This is a very balanced view of Islam, that actually Islam is something, it's not extremist, but not in any political sense, neither in spiritual, neither in any everything in Islam is in economic, both in policy, with economic, in spiritual, in the way of dealing your personal life. It's always rooted in the trying to find an equilibrium, a balance. But sometimes it's more seems to be more difficult for human beings to find a balance, instead to go to some extremist attitude. This is due, I think, more to the psychological constitution of a human being, or maybe also due to the fact that, for example, in Christianity, religion is something which is set you apart from the normal secular space, if we can think about it. But in Islam, there is no this secular and religious space, which seems to be quite separate, or in which there is always a threat of concept of conflict. So I think that in Islam, in the Quran, people, even not believers, they can find point in which they agree. So this is what people think Muslims should do in order to clarify all these issues. So try to interpret the word of Islam, the word of the Quran in Islamic history, in a way to clarify, that to be a means of clarification of all the issue to the Muslim, to non-Muslim. This is a great, I think this is a duty that is upon the community now, because we are not, the condition of the past are changed, and we cannot go on in reproducing the same pattern of behavior and thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so the problem is that we have a lot of misconceptions about Islam, and I pray that Allah grant us all the opportunity to resolve all these most misconceptions about Islam to the non-Muslims. And you're working great with your organization, Tawassul, which is creating which is creating the solutions to the problems and clarifying the things like Islamophobia and how the Muslims are being labeled like the terrorists. So what would be your stance over the topic that how can we remove this name of terrorism over the Muslims?
This is quite, because you see that this is difficult because it involves not only us, but it involves also a very small minority of Muslims that cannot, it's very difficult to control. And we don't know actually which are the relation between the small groups and another force who move actually the political space at a more deeper level than the superficial one. So this is for a normal Muslim. Actually, they are victim of two times. One time if they find themselves in the wrong place in the wrong time, but secondly, they continue to be victim because they became like a kind of white paper where everything can be written according to the purpose of the writer. This is the main. Really the main issue. But I think to fight at the level of terrorism or to fight extremism, we should invest in education, justice, and the spiritual development of the individual who are part of the community. In this way, we remove the youth. So we should keep the youth far from the kind of predator. So they want to twist their mind, unfortunately, through some form of extreme political views or some form of extremist views. You see that we should, at the same time, also we should be quite strong to speak against these things, also to raise also the voice when we see that there is this form of injustice, a continuous attempt to criminalize a community, but at the same time, the community should, when it's criminalized, that should not be the end of their experience. So if you are criminalized, or you go from extremist side, or just you became apologetic, or you became totally you reject your own identity without knowing it. So this is three very much wrong attitudes. So of course, every human being has got the freedom to choose to change his identity, to move forward from a community to another. And this is quite, these people did it for centuries, not only a contemporary phenomenon. But the issue is related to the fact that if the community doesn't become more visible and in the public space, but not always self-referential. So in case there is an issue, and then the reaction in the public space most of the time is unproportionate, or the other kind is not. If we don't want to call it proportionate, we can call it that it's not much constructive, but it's always a destructive attitude. And it also creates troubles between Muslims themselves. This is not because actually that the target does not bother even for a minute about the things. But the reaction should be always constructive. So if there is, if the community's challenges about the Prophet, peace be upon him, or about the Quran, what we should do, they should start a campaign related to know the real feature and the real history of Quranic revelation, or must know the life of the Prophet. So all in this way, as being in the public space, avoiding every form of extremism, it will be possible really for the Muslim to came out from this process, came out from this game, because always a game which they are actually they are never active, so that we should be active. They should be active notwithstanding what comes from outside. This is our duty in a public democratic space. But the problem is that when the Muslims, when they become reactive, they fell on the trap of this and they fell on the terrorist label, or if not terrorists, they will be always labeled, called as extremists. So this is the point. Unfortunately, mostly they became much obsessed about what is the external, symbol of what they may understand. I don't know if we even can call external symbol of Islam, but however, external feature of Muslims. It can be, for example, a woman hijab, or a beard, or a kind of way of dealing, or a kind of way of walk or speaking. This became a kind of obsession that it's not. I don't think that it will be detrimental. So it's not the spirituality of a person. Is not what he dress or what is as he present, but it's what he or she thinks, how he organizes their life, and what is the impact in the long run that the community, as composed by several thousands of people, speaking about a single European country or with millions of people all over the world, is actually impacting in the public space. This is the only way, I think. So to try to find the new language which is inclusive, so means inclusive, not reactionary, and at the same time to find also a way which is to action which is actually not always that reactive, but is active. So we should act, as Iqbal says, to rebuild our civilization independently from the heat who come from outside. Now it seems that mostly they just react to the heat for what comes from outside. Hope I've been clear.
Yes, exactly. So the Islam wouldn't be judged by the appearance of the Muslims, that hijab and the beard thing, but we should be focusing more on the sculptures, what are being said into the scriptures of the Islams mostly. Okay, so now coming to the second part of the questions, which are about Allama Iqbal. So since you have translated a lot of his work, a lot of his philosophies, poetry into Italian, so I would like to know that which was the first poetry that you find really attractive, or you found yourself interested into the Iqbal's poetry, the very first one?
So actually that I read most of the Iqbal poetry, but I'm not an expert in poetry, and unfortunately, and especially in relation to Persian and Urdu, that are two languages that unfortunately I don't know. But I read all I came to know actually the Wings of Jibril or The Call of the Caravan, that are the collection of poems in Urdu. And this has been actually very inspiring for me in the Italian translation, of course, so that I saw the fact that Iqbal is very capable, even when maybe sometimes it's difficult I can understand, because I heard also the poetry in Urdu, recited in Urdu or in Persian, that with another, there is also the element of extreme beauty of the language. But when you read in translation, of course, there is always the problem related to the way in which you convey the meaning. But what is important is the fact that in the poetry of Iqbal there is a way of presenting deep conception about the community in a very simple way, and with the symbols and metaphor were very deep. This is extremely interesting. So when you think about also the difference between the vulture and the eagle. So he say that the vulture is something, is a kind of representation of a civilization who just go and pick what is the remaining of another civilization, just try to nurture itself. So in order to gain power, but this is not what it is. So it's not what Iqbal was thinking for the Muslim community, because the Muslim community or Islamic civilization for Iqbal is an eagle who just fly in the in the sky. So it has got not only fly very high, but it's got the capacity to see. So the eagle has got a very powerful eyesight, and has got this capacity to look at not only a wider sense, but also to look what is specific. So it's a symbol of the Muslim capacity of intellectual power, and also what is their practical power. So the power to imagine something and to create also something. So also when I think about the decadence of the Muslim civilization, or by the fact that in this is the compare about the poverty or the lack of education or backwardness that he saw in his own time. So he wanted to inspire the Muslim community to open a new way of thinking, and he did very, very beautifully also in a Lament of the Orphan, that it was a source of inspiration for the people of his time, that even when he wrote, I think when he was quite young. And actually, this is all this component that make his poetry extremely is a way of originally convey to the common people his views of the future and the greatness of the modern civilization.
Right. So the symbolic languages and the metaphor that Allama Iqbal used in his poetry and philosophy to make the common person understand about the philosophies of the life and what has been written into the Quran. So that was remarkable indeed. So what do you think that how relevant Iqbal's poetry and philosophy is in today's world? How can we relate to it now?
I think it's a starting point. It's a starting point. It's a way of being inspired, and is actually something that we can really rely upon to open a new way. So Iqbal teaches us the right way to relate to our past, and the right way to be open towards the future. So his view is optimistic. Is optimistic, but not because his optimism is related to his inner or psychological individualistic disposition, but also because it's rooted in what he knew about the potentiality of Muslim civilization, what is the notion of Quranic, the importance of Quranic revelation in our contemporary world. So he saw, I think, that his contemporary did not understand Iqbal fully, because every great thinker is a thinker which goes beyond his own time, and maybe it could be understood only by people who are coming after him after a long time. This is the reason why that today the philosophy of Iqbal can still inspire, that because still a lot of things should be done following his teaching, following his inspiration, in order to build a new way of thinking, which is not only related to the East or Islam, but I think it could have a big impact in the history of human thought and intellectual development. This, I think, Islam is not only for the East or an inspiration only for Muslims, but is a thinker which is so complete, so full of potentiality, so full of new insight. Because, as I said during the lecture, some of the point of Iqbal, present both in the poetry and both in the in philosophy, are not being still deeply developed. So this is our duty to do this, and inshallah that it is possible to find this constant inspiration from his talks at every level.
Right. So, Allama Iqbal talk a lot about how Muslims should be reacting and how their life should be into the subcontinent and later in their life. So, what do you think that Allama Iqbal's poetry and philosophy will be implemented into the practical life, often individual and also in the affairs of Ummah? So, there are two perspectives, like the individual and also the affairs of Ummah.
So I think that at individual level, the education is important, which is rooted in knowledge and respect for your past, without being a slave of your past and without losing hope or becoming like a passive in a world that you don't recognize. So Islam, Iqbal teaches us that the world as is now, as it was before, it belongs to God. The historical moment we are living is part of God's plan. As is part of God's plan, we Muslims, we are called to not only accept it, this is it could be understood as a passive way of reacting, but we should look to it with sabr, so which is not only meaning of patience in a passive way, but it's a meaning of being steadfast, be perseverant. So Muslims should be perseverant, but to see, not expecting immediate results of direction, not expecting immediate results in terms that maybe from human point of view they are positive, but sometimes we see that the Quran says that will test you with good and bad, and sometimes when you test with good, you don't know what is the outcome of it. So, but or you will be tested with bad or difficulties of challenges, and then when you find that the challenges is a moment of growth. So we should not when it's sometimes difficult for a human being to understand. This means this is a wrong word, but we cannot understand what is the cadre of which is the move, where history is going. So we are called to act. We are called to be engaged in the world without losing the hope that to not to be only spectator or to be witness of an historical course that doesn't belong to us really, because we sometimes we feel victim of it. We don't feel it. Speak about the world history, understood as a world movement, or we don't find fit for it, or mostly they say that we should make a choice, or this world, or get inside themselves, or find a way to remove themselves from the public space or from the social or whatever, even to go to different form of extremism. So think Iqbal teach to the human being, every human being, as a person, as an individual, to be open, to maintain his identity, to preserve his identity, but not to make his identity a kind of idol, but to find the moment of encounter with our civilization, a moment of dialogue, to give privilege to it. So dialogue, encounter, inclusiveness should always be at the center of the believer life when he wants to be witness of Islam. And the traditional level, at the level of the Ummah, of course, that will be the fact that Muslims should start the same way. They should start to creating cultural institutions. This is mainly speaking about the experience in the West, where there is no cultural institution worthy of this name. But they should create cultural institutions. They should create a newspaper. They should be they should start speaking the language of the culture in which they live, not always, and should not be continuously oppositional. They should not be a reactive, oppositional, or because more they are reactive, more they are opposition, more they will be pushed towards the limit, more they will be marginalized. So this is the reason why that to face this kind of challenges is it visits the maturity, the deep maturity of the Ummah. So if the Ummah, the community is mature enough, they will face, they will be ready to face all the troubles, because what is and the most important thing is the relation between community and individual. So what is the test of an individual is also a test for all community. So this means that if an individual or a small group find the challenges, that if all the community should be supportive, they should be supportive of situation, they should be supportive in terms of economic support, spiritual support, there should be educational support. This is a very important, because and then first of all, and then we should think remove all form of sectarism in that way. So unfortunately, Muslims, the tendency is to be divided, and they have conflict in the community, and then this also they cannot. The strength of the community is scattered. It is extremely scattered between the conflict which is inside, and from the conflict the force who are coming from outside. And so this is a very detrimental process that in the end will be a real source of lack of confidence. This is as much as related to the young generation, and also loss of spiritual power, because if you don't have this spiritual powers, cultural power sometimes is more effective in the long run of the military or the brutal force power. So this soft power can influence, especially in democratic countries, even in not democratic countries, through other channels. Of course, it can actually create a new way of people thinking. So the public opinion is very important. So Muslims should understand how to influence the public opinion in the good way. So they don't have to do anything. They don't have to invent anything which is unknown. But what they have to do, and the only that they have to do, is actually to learn a new language in which to express the Islamic, the truth of Islam, without being, in order that people will not look at Islam as an oppressive force or something that should be fear. Actually, this is the problem now, that most of that, especially in the West, there are some movements who want to show Islam as something that has to be feared of. So, and then themselves, that Muslims are invited to boycott every kind of public space and every kind of public involvement in the name of a kind of identity preservation, but it's actually detrimental. This is another way to kill Islam in the mind and in the heart of the young generation. So this is I talked about it. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's about like Muslims being open and being interactive with the world without losing their true own self, and without losing their spirit into the worldly glimmers, and being attached to Allah and what His scripture says into the Quran and the life of the Holy Prophet, and it will automatically change the composition and the people's behavior towards the Ummah and the Muslims. Okay, with that, we're done with the question answer session. Thank you for your brief and such descriptive answers. Apart from that, lastly, I would like to convey a message, or that you would like to say to all the people or the audience that are listening to us through this platform, what you would like to share.
So I would like just to a brief talks related to. I would like to invite the young generation of Muslims to rediscover their own self through Iqbal poetry, through Iqbal talks, and come back to the sources, read the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, with new eyes, and to understand the responsibility that they have for the community, and not only for their community, but as human beings and deputy of God in this world, to rediscover their responsibility towards the world and all humanity and the environment. And everything exists is in this world. Allah decided to be given to human being as a responsibility. So Muslims should rediscover, I think, this very important central Quranic teaching. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your such enlightening message for our youth and about the recognition of our own responsibilities. And thank you so much for taking time out for us so that we can learn the aspects we are unaware about. So thank you so much, Doctor.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hopefully this session with Sabrina Lei would have been enlightened you in terms of learning, since I have learned a lot with that particular session. And with that, we will ask for a leave and we will ask for a leave until the next session. Thank you so much.